Hello everyone and welcome back to Lightchannel Denmark. Today we are again blessed having Jonathan Gray with us from New Zealand. And this is the 10th program he is with us where he is answering some critical questions from his book Discoveries. Maybe you remember that last time he was with us, he was sharing that the first time when he went to Noah's Ark, that was in 1992, he was actually put to prison. It was a very dangerous area at that time, and he could actually have got lifetime in prison. But the Lord opened the prison doors and allowed Jonathan to get out. And I believe that happened so that he could do more research on all these discoveries, so that you, if you are skeptical, could come to believe that the Bible is true and that there is a good God who loves you and have a plan with your life. So today we are going to talk more about what evidence is there that this is the remains of the Noah's Ark, and is there enough evidence for the skeptic? You know, even if Jonathan was put to prison the first time he went to this site, he went back several times, and he has lost how many times he has been there. And why do you think he was going back when it was so dangerous? You know, we asked him this question last time, and Jonathan was answering that truth is very important to him. And Jonathan loves God very much, and he wants to glorify God and stand up for him. And that is what we in Light Channel also want to do, to stand up for the Lord, because we love him. And I hope that you also will stand up for the Lord. In Matthew 17:12, we can read, "And he said to them, because of your little faith, for truly I say unto you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and I will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Isn't that great? Wow, nothing will be impossible for you. You know, the first time when Ron Wyatt went to Noah's Ark was covered with lava, and it was impossible to do any research on the boat. So Ron Wyatt went back to the States, and he was praying for several months that the Lord, please, if he could move the lava and lift the boat. And that seems like a prayer which could not be answered, right? But everything is possible for the Lord. So how did God answer the prayer? In 1978, I said it in 1978, God, in the morning, the blue sky was blue, and suddenly the sky became silver. And all the people in that area, they went out of their houses and they said, miracle, miracle. And then the earthquake came and lifted the boat up 5 meters. And even the Turkish newspapers were writing, that was really a miracle. So the Lord, he wants to do greater things for us than we even think praying about. So last time, Jonathan was explaining to us why the trees which Noah built Noah's Ark out of actually have turned to some kind of stone. And he also was explaining why there is no growth rings in the trees which was before Noah's Ark. And if you have not seen the earlier links with Jonathan, you are welcome to watch them on our YouTube channel. And if you think that Noah's Ark is a small boat, then you have to rethink. It is 1.5 times longer than the football ground. So here you can see a picture of actually how huge it was compared to other boats. Yes. And today we are going to talk more about Noah's Ark. We are going to ask some more critical questions about scanning the boat, and also about these anchors, which was in connection with Noah's Ark. So let's pray. Yes, Father in heaven, we are just so grateful that you are such a good Father. We know, Lord, that we can trust in you. Thank you, Lord, that you show us your love by sending your Son down to this earth, taking our penalty on the cross, and also showing us your character. We know, Lord, that you are the same today, yesterday, and forever. And we know that, Jesus, when you were here on the earth, you just love to go around and forgive people for sins and heal them both physically, mentally, and spiritually. And we thank you again that you are the same today. Please be with us now, Lord, with your Holy Spirit, when we are going to have some more questions answered about Noah's Ark and these findings. We pray, Lord, that you will bless those who might be skeptical, that they will be convinced that that the Bible is true, and that you love them, and that we all can put your trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hello, everyone. Joining Light Channel TV on this webcast again with our special guest, our very dear guest from New Zealand, Jonathan Gray. Welcome again, Jonathan. We're so happy to have you with us again.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
And thank you, Eva, for the introduction. It's a very good point to remind our viewers where we left our programs, our webcast at the last portion, the last time. Today we're going to continue our conversation about Noah's Ark, and maybe some of our viewers are going to get a little bit nervous and ask the question, what is it so much to talk about Noah's Ark? I mean, either is there and somebody has been there and took some pictures, did some measurements, and we presented images. So what's all this conversation to talk about? But nevertheless, Jonathan, I have here with me your very interesting book, that's Discoveries, Question Answered, which is the basis of this webcast about Noah's Ark. And as you can see, this is a very thick book, and I would recommend anyone interested to know everything which is to know, at least until you left the site, Jonathan, about Noah's Ark. It's in here. You have not just Jonathan's experience, but you have a lot of other information which comes from many other independent researchers at Noah's Ark. And maybe you could again tell our viewers a little bit about this very interesting book, Jonathan.
Well, this book actually was written because of the skeptics, and we wanted to help them to see what the truth was. Because I started out as a skeptic relating to this Noah's Ark,
Right.
but rather than repeat the accusations of others and the charges which were not true of others, I decided to go myself to the spot, take my own teams of scientists, and we would see whether Ron Wyatt, the disclosure, was telling the truth. And not only were we convinced, but everything that we were able to do matched exactly the results that Ron was claiming he had received.
Right. And what I also like about the book, it fits me very well, suits me very well. You have done a very good structure on the book, which is that you have taken each question, and the questions are numbered, and that's why we are taking these questions actually question by question, and you will see the number on the screen. So tonight we've reached to question number 44 in this book. We're going to put that on the screen in a second. And what this question is going to cover, we're not going to cover the 12 bullet points tonight. We're going to cover in this webcast only the first one and the second one, which is about the anchor stones and the metal in the ground around the boat and on the shape. This is what we're going to cover tonight. So let's go ahead, Jonathan, because the first step that we're going to cover tonight is as I mentioned before, the ship's anchor stones in the vicinity. And before you
Yeah.
go there, Jonathan, I just want to point to our viewers. And if you want to make an explanation, and I'm sure everybody, I mean, almost anyone should know about an anchor, what an anchor is, and not just what it is, but what the purpose is for an anchor. So we don't need to take that from that perspective. But I'd like you to, before we go there, to explain our viewers. I know this is going to come a little bit later in our webcast as well, but could you please explain our viewer the purpose of these anchor stones related to Noah's Ark?
Well, on the tops of hills in the region, Ron Wyatt actually found these big stone objects lying on the tops of the mountains with holes through them. And they were similar to ancient sea anchors. Now, sea anchors were used in the past for three reasons. They were essential equipment for all ships. And in rough seas, they would hang down in the water with their flat sides, and they would stop the boat from rocking sideways too much and keep it stable against high waves and bad tempests. In calm waters, the anchors actually would hang down straight inside the water, waiting until the ground level underneath came up to the same area, and they would be sounding for the bottom, so the ship would know that it was coming into shallow water. And then other times the anchors would be moved sideways, and they would be able to manipulate the boat around an obstruction or a submerged object that might hurt it, so that it would go around that. And anchor stones had this very flexible range of purposes and kept the ship safe in calm water, in rough seas, and in seas that had objects underneath that might hurt the boat. That was the purpose of the anchor stones.
All right, that was thank you for the explanation. So one of the reasons I've asked you this question in the very beginning is to underline the purpose of the anchor stone. So you mentioned not just one or two, but several purposes for the anchor stones. And again, the reason to ask this question in the very beginning and to give the explanation to our viewers, maybe our skeptical viewers, is that these pictures and the explanation that you're going to give, the findings around Noah's Ark, they're not just meaningless. So these very smart people that have used the anchor stones, which we believe to be on the Noah's Ark, they did it on purpose. They knew what they were doing when they were actually attaching these anchor stones to the ship. Am I correct, Jonathan?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, right.
All ancient ships used anchor stones. Today, ships use what they call sea sockets, water sockets, but they still have something that does the same job.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let's go ahead with the first question, because some people are saying, but aren't the so-called anchor stones too far away from the site? Since the stones are as far as 14 miles away, surely they cannot be connected to the Ark if this was the Ark. What is your comment on this, Jonathan?
Yes. Okay. Now, on the slopes of the mountains in the Ararat region, more or less in a straight, or actually in a curving line, a slightly curving line leading up to the Ark site, there have been found 13 giant sea anchors. They are of the size that would have been needed by a ship as big as Noah's Ark. When you compare these with the anchor stones that are found near shipwrecks today, they're the right size for a boat the size of Noah's Ark. And they appear to lie near the same spot as when they were dropped from the Ark. Now, a man called Mel Fisher found the wreck of a ship in the waters of Florida. It was a ship that was wrecked in 1622, and it was named the Etosha. And its anchors were 16 miles. That's 25 kilometers away from the main wreck site. So the anchors actually were often dropped off a ship or cut loose as a ship was in danger and as it was coming in somewhere close to land. And then as they tried to manipulate the boat away to safety, they might find it necessary to drop another anchor off. Now, David Fassold, who joined the team, Ron Wyatt's team, he made an interesting comment. Now, David was a marine salvage expert. He was used to exploring ancient shipwrecks. And he said, as a marine salver, I don't see the problem, nor would any of the wreckers I've worked with see a problem. But in working with ark hunters, here's the catch. If these anchor stones had been found at the foot of Big Mount Ararat, the main Mount Ararat, by an astronaut who was famous, a famous man, they would be the ark's anchors found by St. James Irwin. We all know that because they were found by Ron Wyatt, who was an unknown man, and he was not a sea experienced man, and he says that because he found the anchor stones, that's the problem. It's not a case of the anchor stones being the problem. It's a case of who found them and where did he find them.
Right. So
that's the problem with the skeptics.
There it goes.
And when we see that this shipwreck in Florida was even further away than the anchor stones leading up to Noah's Ark, that's sure. Natural. That's normal for a ship in rough waters.
Right. Okay. Well, we're gonna show our viewers some very interesting pictures, which I'd like you to comment. Again, here the first pictures. I'm sure you probably know. I have this from a source, which it's a reliable source, coming from Ark Discovery from Kevin Fisher. This is the first picture I have. Commenting on this, and the second picture I have here is also from the same source. It's difficult to see the background where the stones are located. We have to rely on the source. On the picture to the left says that above one of the anchor stones buried perhaps just after the flood, the soil has eroded enough that it can now be seen. It contains no crosses, and we're going to cover that later in this webcast. Do you have any comments on these stones so far, Jonathan?
Well, the stones were there for a purpose. The holes in the stones were there for a purpose, and that was to thread a cable to the ship one end and to around the stones at the other end. And yes, they all have that. All the ancient anchor stones have the hole near the top.
All right. Okay. Another picture I have, it's this one here. Do you know this picture? There is a Turkish guide, a local, pointing to one of the anchor stones. I know the quality of the picture is not that good, but do you know the story behind these pictures?
Oh, yes. And in fact, I've got a photograph of Ron Wyatt beside it. I have a photograph of myself beside it. It's one of the anchor stones standing up near the village of Eight, which is down the valley from the Ark.
Okay. All right. Okay, I actually have
and it's it's one stone that's in a straight line with other stones that were dropped on the hilltops as the Ark was coming into land in that area.
Okay. And some of the last pictures I have from this source, you can see the comparison of the side of the Noah's Ark. Below picture on the lower picture on the left side, and there is an anchor stone on the top image on the left side, and comparison to a Roman anchor stone which was found in England. That's all the way back from the Roman Empire. So, Jonathan, this thing, as you explained in the very beginning, this thing about the anchor stones, this is not something which is unique or related just to this site, which you claim and a lot of other people claim to be Noah's Ark.
No, no. This is regular, normal equipment that ancient shipping had.
Right. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Because the question comes from skeptics. Would you explain that that's something about the crosses? Surely the crosses on the so-called anchor stones are not of a Christian nature, but satanic. And Noah would not have used the symbol of a satanic deity. And as you can see, that's an explanation for the picture. The large sea anchor stands with crosses inscribed on its face and Mount Ararat in distance. David Fassel said there is 4 feet of stone in the ground. So that's a big stone. That's a big anchor stone. And the image is from arkdiscovery.com. This is where we have these images. Before you go there, Jonathan, could you please explain why would it be an issue to have crosses on these anchor stones, which supposedly are coming from Noah's Ark?
Well, the crosses are not from the Ark. The crosses were added later. And there's 2 types of crosses carved on these, 2 styles. One is from the Byzantine times, and the other is from the Crusader times. And you can identify the time period by the type of crosses that were relevant at the time in history when these crosses were put on. And things change with history and with time. And any expert would be able to say, well, those crosses were put on the stones in the Crusader times, or these crosses were put on the stones during the Byzantine times. And that identifies the time and the people who would have done it. They were not people related to Noah. They've been put there since. Right. And I think some of these people during the Middle Ages recognized that these were anchor stones from the Ark. I mean, people were not so skeptical back in those days. They saw evidence and they would accept it, and they would not say, well, so-and-so found it, so it can't be right. If it was found by me, it would be all right, but I didn't find it, so it can't be right.
Well, I guess they didn't have Ron Wyatt in the Middle Ages to blame, right?
That's right.
So probably...
and the anchor stones you've been looking at are near the village of Kazan, which is the village of 8, where 8 people, first of all, came to live after they came out of the Ark. And that name has stuck with it for all these years.
Yeah. And here we have another picture of another view of the same stone, which is diamond-shaped, representing Nimrod, who came from this area after the flood. That's what the Bible history is telling us.
Yes. Now, an interesting thing, this stone actually has more than 8 crosses on it. And examining closely these crosses shows that many of these were put on at a later date. In other words, there were 2 different times in history when crosses were put on this one. And some people put a few crosses on to start with, but later on others came along and put some more crosses on it. And the algae, that's the growing, the little green growth is not growing on these later ones. It's only growing on the earlier crosses. So you can see there was a different period, even the growth of the natural fungus on them only grows on some of them, not the others. And the ones with a different style don't have it.
Yeah, that's
so this is all historically done, but nothing to do with Noah.
Yeah. Okay, well, Jonathan, the claim that you're making in your book, and according to your discoveries, you're claiming that there are 8 crosses on these stones representing the 8 people aboard the Ark. But doesn't the number of crosses on the stones vary? As we have seen in the pictures, there are either 6 crosses or several number of crosses. How then can the crosses on these stones be associated in any way with the ark.
Oh yes. Well, as I was mentioning, the eight was because the people who put those crosses on first recognized that this was associated with Noah and the 8 people in the ark. So they put the 8 crosses on. But later on, many years later, others came along and just added some crosses of their own, a different style of cross, showing that they came at a later time. And those ones don't have the fungus growth growing on them like the first lot do. So there's 2 different times periods when they were made.
Now, speaking of this fungus, Jonathan, have you done any studies on the fungus itself? I know it's outside of your expertise, but do you know anyone if there has ever been any studies on the fungus to have some idea about the age or the growth of the fungus?
No, the fungus itself, as far as I know, has not been examined. But we can tell the difference in age, the difference when the 8 crosses were put on and when the 6 were put on. You can tell the difference by the style of cross, which suits that time in history when people used to do those style of crosses and carve them on.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, the reason I was asking this was in case you had any data in regards to the dating of the stones. That comes from, well, scientific background. Today, a lot of people, they rely on carbon dating. So I was thinking maybe someone somewhere have done any carbon dating on these stones, at least to try to do some dating. And I don't want to get into a carbon dating conversation because as I'm sure you know, it's a quite unreliable technology, but nevertheless, it's out there. Unless you have any comments on that. The next question is from the skeptics, is that are they not merely pagan Armenian stones? Because the Armenians seems to have made them and carved the inscription on the stones at a time they made them. There is evidence that these had other inscriptions on them besides the crosses, and that these pagan inscriptions were chiseled at a later date and replaced by Christian crosses. And this is no mere conjecture, as those who have examined this report that there is evidence of an earlier defacement. And that's a statement which comes from creation science. At least that's an allegation. Okay. That's one of the stones which is supposedly, because there is an inscription from Armenian inscription on the right side, as stated on below the picture. The allegation is that these are not the anchor stones from Noah's Ark, but are some stones which were made by Armenians a few thousand years ago. And now, because we've reached there, Jonathan, I just want to ask you, before you answer this question, could you please again, because we're taking these allegations from creation science, and no offense against creation science, they've done a great job, but why are they still claiming that this is not Noah's Ark? Because that's, as far as you know and as far as I know, even at this point in time, they're still claiming, no, this is not the site of Noah's Ark. And as far as we know, they're still searching on the top of the Mount Ararat, right?
Yes. Well, this is a sad story of dishonesty. I spent a lot of time dealing with the Creation Science Group, particularly their CEO, Carl Whelan. And I presented evidence that would stand up in any law court, anywhere in the world. But he then continued spouting out that this was not Noah's Ark, even though he now had evidence that he didn't have it first. And once you have stuck your neck out publicly and made a statement, it's hard for you to publicly admit that you've made a wrong statement and turn around.
Yeah.
And that's the sad story about it. I'm sorry. The evidence is there, and people in creation science have admitted this as good evidence, but the leader of creation science will not admit anything, no matter how wrong he sees himself. And this is sad.
Right.
Repentance means turning around. And this is what the Lord expects each of us to do if we've done wrong. And doing wrong is not telling the truth about something. You find evidence for it, that it is true, but you still continue the same story.
Right. But that wouldn't be difficult for you, Jonathan, because you've done it in the past, right? You were wrong in the beginning about Ron Wyatt. Did you have a problem to admit it in public?
No problem, because truth is much more important.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus humbled himself to come and save us. What's wrong with us humbling ourselves to say, well, I was wrong?
Exactly. And
in fact, he expects us to. We're supposed to have the mind of Jesus, where we would humble ourselves to accept his sacrifice, that I'm a sinner, I've done wrong, I need his help. And that's what he expects from each of us.
And we are only human. Anybody can make mistakes, and there is nothing wrong in making mistakes if we at some point we acknowledge that we've done a mistake and repent, as you said, or at least say sorry, or say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. This is actually the evidence today. But obviously it seems that this is not a point with creation science, at least on the subject of Noah's Ark. Still today, right?
It's not about evidence. It's about building self up. That's a sad story.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go ahead, because I have a couple of more pictures to show in regards to the Armenians. That's another claim which is being made. This is an Armenian inscription which has been translated. The cross was placed. That's the translation. Saint Intercessor Hosig, Armenian, 29731 or 531. That's AD year. Hosig was martyred in 347 AD. That's the inscription. So again, that's being used to prove that actually these are Armenian inscriptions and not anchor stones.
Well, one of the anchor stones Ron found, it was still partially buried in the earth and is only just now becoming visible. And apparently it was buried in the mud when it was dropped. Only now, and when it was dropped from the ark, and only now is the earth eroding away from it enough for it to become visible. And none of the, actually there are three like that now, just becoming visible for the first time as the earth starts eroding away from them. And not one of them have crosses carved on them, yet they all have the same hole at the top. They've all got the same form. And this disproves the old theory that the Armenians made them and carved them and carved the inscriptions on them at the time they made them.
Yeah, all right. Well,
sorry. Go ahead. No, that's all.
Okay. Well, I have a statement from Dr. Robert Michelson, which is a research scientist, and he's been making this statement on the History Channel, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that makes reference to quotation, "You can't cross the water without the stone things." What are they talking about? That's his statement. They're talking about the sea anchors. That's Dr. Michelson that gives 3 hours presentation on the Ark side. He's produced several videos on the Ark side and can be seen here. That's the link where you can find a link to Dr. Michelson's videos about the Ark side. So at least from his perspective, from this scientist, there is no doubt in his mind, that's what he's telling everyone else, that these are anchor stones, because the Gilgamesh reference, which has been known worldwide. Am I correct, Jonathan? The Gilgamesh finding the stone.
Yes, it's a Babylonian version of the Great Flood.
Right. And do you happen to remember the date of this stone, the Gilgamesh?
Oh, after the book of Genesis, probably about 1000 BC, close to 1500 BC.
Right. Okay. And compared to the Armenian culture, just to make a comparison, that if these stones were part of the Armenian, let's say, Christian culture, that doesn't really fit time-wise, does it?
No,
No.
no, it doesn't fit at all.
Because Christianity came into the area where we know as history, the Armenian history, Christianity came at a much later point, right?
That's right.
Right. Okay. Just to test your memory, Jonathan. That was a very good description. Let's go ahead. I have more pictures. Again, the claim is that a photograph of one of the anchor stones Ron found, which is still partially buried in the earth, and it's just now become visible in connection if those were not pagan Armenian stones, not just Christian, but pagan. Do you have any comments on this?
Well, the burial. Why would they have these stones then bury them so deep? The fact is that these stones got buried deep because the earth was still, after the flood, the earth was still settling down and it hardened around them, and the stones sank down when the earth was soft during the flood time as Noah was cutting them loose from the ark, and that's why they sank down into it, and then the earth hardened, and only now is it starting to erode away. So these have not been accessible to the Armenians. They could not have done anything with them because they were buried.
Right.
And the burial is only just starting to make itself evident, with the stones appearing for the first time above the ground.
But even if those stones, let's assume that these stones were pagan Armenian stones. You just made a point before. I want to re-emphasize this. If they were pagan, and they were supposed to worship these stones as some kind of pagan gods, right? Why would they bury them? Again, why would they bury? Maybe, okay, somebody would say that was part of their tradition, but it doesn't make sense. If they were supposed to worship these stones as some kind of a pagan god, they wouldn't know where the stone will be unless they would have done a mark. So it doesn't really, I mean, at least in my perspective here, it's not logic to
No.
This, no, right. Okay.
Well, among skeptics, as you say, it makes common sense that they would not bury them. But among skeptics, it's often said that common sense is not so common.
Right. Because it doesn't fit my worldview, and so I need to find another explanation. Could that be the reason?
Yes. And it's not about truth. It's about my view being right, not yours.
Right. Well, another critic, which we have on the screen, states that they are just Armenian tombstones, and that Soviet Armenian is loaded with stones like this with holes in them. Again, from another Creation Science article.
And the interesting thing, Michael, is that they never name any of these people because these people don't exist. It's a made-up objection.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot about these Armenian stones. And if we move on, another stone with possible image of the Tower of Babel per Ron Wyatt. Do you happen to know if this discovery was done by Ron himself?
I'm not familiar with that, but of course, if it has the Tower of Babel on it, it would not have been done by Noah, of course.
Okay, right. Okay. The next one we have comes from also from the same. That's a picture of an anchor stone on a hilltop outside the village of Arzeb. Is this town with Crusader-style crosses inscribed on it. The hole is broken on the right side of the stone. So could it be that the stone with holes in them were not made by Noah's workmen, but by someone since the flood, and the holes were cut in the top to drag the stones to their present location?
Well, whoever makes that objection should really tell marine archaeologists that they are getting the same types of stones from ancient harbors and ancient shipwrecks off the Mediterranean Sea, that they're not recovering anchor stones, but they're recovering Armenian tombstones from the bottom of the sea. Doesn't make sense. So if you believe the person who makes this argument, then the picture in this column is a Romanian tombstone, and not a
anchor stone.
Not an anchor stone. Now, out of water, these holes at the end, out of water, these holes actually, if you were dragging the stone along the ground, the holes are so close with the weight of those stones, the hole would break.
Right.
You could not make those stones had holes in them, and the holes are too close to the top to be used to drag the stones up onto the hilltops where they're found. They only are buoyant enough in water. The stones in water would be lighter, and the ropes could hold them. But to try to drag them out of the water, because they're not anchor stones, and drag them along somewhere, and those holes were used for dragging them along, that would not be possible because they'd break.
Well, again, if, let's say, the assumption which is made by creation science that these were tombstones, did anybody ever find any relics, any skeletons around these stones, just to prove that these were tombstones? No. Okay.
Nothing to do with skeletons or dead people anywhere in that area.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that each of these are on hilltops, mountaintops, and where the ark was coming in and into shallow water, where there was a hilltop, Noah would have dropped the anchor stone there, and when they hit land again under the water, he'd drop the next anchor stone, and gradually they were coming into shallower water, and they were dropping the stones periodically along in a straight line, and this is how we find them today.
And this is the logical explanation that there is about these stones. But if these stones were tombstones, just one question related to this argument: did anybody or creation science, did they make any studies to show if did Armenians, before they became Christian, did they actually bury their people on the top of the mountains like this?
No, burial on top of mountains would be too difficult. They would bury their dead at places that were easier to reach, to visit later.
Exactly. Okay, so it doesn't really make sense, because there is no combination of data or information to prove this argument that they were tombstones.
No. And the interesting thing is that these arguments are made in somebody's office, at their desk, in their house. And they're not made by people who went to Turkey and had looked them for themselves. These people making these objections have never even been to the spot. They make it from a long time distance out of their heads.
Okay, that's a very interesting way of arguing against this. But you're making this statement in your book on page 79. As critical edge, could these stones be nothing more than pagan stela, and the holes are not for ropes, but are niches for candles?
Well, an interesting thing. The picture on the left there is of a Turkish diver finding these same stones on the bottom of the sea in the Mediterranean coast near a shipwreck. And that's typical. You're going to tell that Turkish diver that he's he's finding a tombstone with lights, a place for lights in it, down by the shipwreck in the sea. No. Now, the hole, the very interesting thing about the hole, it's wider. The hole goes right through from one side of the rock to the other, and it's wider, the hole in the center. Now, this suggests that whatever went through there, a rope or a cable, had a knot tied in it, which when it was in the water, it would swell up and hold it tight. And this is exactly what they used to do in ancient ships. They would drill a hole through, but they'd make the hole wider in the center. And when they tied a knot, the knot would swell and the rope would belong to the stone and the ship without loss.
Wow, that's a very interesting point. I was actually thinking when I was doing this presentation, how and why would they have the hole bigger in the middle? And obviously they were probably using a lot of power to pull the rope through the hole because of the knot, right?
Yes. They made the hole on the two outside ends big enough for a knot to go through before it would swell, and after it swelled, it would be bigger.
Yeah, that's I would say that's pretty smart and makes sense. Jonathan, the next thing is that, did they really need anchor stones? I know you covered that a little in the beginning. I said we're gonna dig into this a little bit more. Would Noah's Ark, my question related to this, would it be possible for Noah's Ark to sail without anchor stones? Would that be possible? And I know you're not a marine expert, but based on your knowledge, and you've been talking to marine experts, and let's be honest, because anyone that has been sailing, I would like to know if anyone have ever seen a good sailing boat even today without an anchor. And this is, I guess, well, take it from here, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, that would be my question too. The fact is that anchors served three purposes. The anchor stone actually, with its flat surface area against the water, created a drag in rough sea, and that stopped the vessel from slipping sideways against a wave and being tipped over. And in calmer waters, the stones hung deep, reaching for the bottom, sounding for the bottom. And they were also manipulated to direct a vessel around an obstruction. So as the flood began to subside and the ark drifted into shallow waters, it appears from the location of the first two anchors that they snagged on two submerged peaks, where each one in turn, they cut the anchors loose, and those anchors still lie a short distance apart. Then others progressively were dropped in a curving arc toward the landing site, and the last anchor stone is close to the present resting place of the ark. Now today, instead of drag stones, ships have what is called sea socks, which trail in the water, and they fulfill a similar function. Very necessary.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this comment, and that also makes it very obvious, I would say, from my perspective, and I'm trying to be a skeptic here tonight. That would most likely, without God's help, would totally damage the ark. It wouldn't have been possible for the ark to sail around or even to stay on water. At some point, taking into consideration the power of the flood and the storm, that will most likely, without these anchor stones, would not have been possible for the ark to sail around and would most likely have been destroyed. Is that a correct assumption, Jonathan?
Yes, it is, most certainly.
So they were quite essential. They were life-saving part tools of the ark.
That's right.
Mm.
And if the ark was going sideways all the time, everybody would be sick. It kept the ship stable so that in the rough weather, the ship could just rock a little bit, but not be tipped over.
Right. Okay. Well, I wish at some point we could bring in a marine expert to do a scientific explanation about the impossibility for this type of ark to be able to sail around without these anchor stones. And the reason I'm saying that is just because it doesn't really make sense on the little knowledge that I have and what you're explaining here, that this ship could have ever been able to sail around without these anchor stones. And by the way, Jonathan, do you happen to know if anyone has the other expeditions, as the creation science are still doing, and some other expeditions which are still trying to find on the top of the Mount Ararat, did they ever find any stones up there at the top of the mountains? Just one?
Not one. Not one.
Not a single anchor stone?
Not one.
Okay. Do you happen to know if there is any explanation why they didn't find these stones? At least one?
Oh, they're very silent about that.
Okay.
They only want to say what will destroy Ron Wyatt's reputation. They don't want anything else.
Okay, so there is silence about this. I know we had a conversation here before from also known archaeologists, which is known also by some people from a ministry that we do respect, but we happen to have a disagreement on the location of Noah's Ark, which obviously from their perspective, which we mentioned before, has been placed further away into the Armenian territory. If you remember that we were having a conversation about this previous.
Yes.
Yeah. And we don't have to mention the name, but the theory goes that Noah's Ark most likely landed into that area. Do you happen to know if anyone found similar anchor stones into that area?
No anchor stones, as far as I know, have ever been found there. And by the way, in that area further east, that's not the mountains of Ararat. And the biblical location is the correct one.
Right. Okay. Let's move on here because we still have some questions to cover. How dare you suggest, or somebody is saying, that these to be anchor stones from Noah's Ark, because the Bible portrays Noah's role as passive, not dropping the anchors as the ark approached the landing place. And I have some accounts which you are pointing out into your book, but please do comment your own statements from your own book on page 80.
Yes. Now, the Bible account regarding the flood is very brief. It's only one chapter in the book of Exodus, in the book of Genesis. And it does not go into detail. Every detail is not given, but in every biblical act of deliverance, as Noah's was, divine and human cooperation was required. You go through all the Bible stories and you'll find that when God delivered people, they had to do something too, but God made the deliverance. Now, in the same with the ark, God delivered them, but Noah had to do something. And it's interesting that among the 600 worldwide traditions that have been handed down over the centuries, 600 worldwide legends about the Great Flood, several of them mention the stones. And the Sanskrit and Sumerian accounts, which are among the oldest, speak of these stones. And in the one that you mentioned, the Gilgamesh record from Babylon, it talks about cutting the cables and handling lines. And it talks about there is no crossing death's waters without the stone things. today we would say there's no driving a car without the brake things. Right. And actually, the historian Herodotus called the ancient anchor stones braking stones. In other words, that you put on the brakes if you're coming into shallow land to save the ship being wrecked. The drag stones actually is like putting on the brakes, slows it down.
Mm-hmm.
And the Muslim Quran says, in the name of Allah, it will cast anchor. That's talking about Noah's Ark. So if they didn't have something like anchors, then what would they use to bring the ark to a stop without it being destroyed?
Well, that's a very good point, Jonathan. And this is one of the last statements we're going to make, at least in this webcast, about the anchors. Because you mentioned, and I was thinking when you said about that there is a human part and there is a part that God will do, and that's called cooperation between humans and God, right? And
yes.
if we're talking about this from a biblical perspective, or let's say a supernatural perspective, at the same time, Noah wouldn't have had to build the ark, right? Because of course for God it would be possible to just take them away, to do some kind of a rapture and take anyone away, keep them somewhere in heaven or above the earth for a number of days during the flood, and then put them back on earth. So why would Noah have to go through all this trouble for 120 years to build this ark? Why would God, spend time or waste time to tell Noah, very detailed how to build this ark, to spend all these resources that have been spent, unless there was a purpose, there was a meaning in building this ark? And was it because God couldn't do the supernatural thing? Or was it because there was this thing called cooperation between human and God, because there is a purpose? I'm sure you have an answer on this, and I'm probably not the only one, putting this out there. What do you have any comment on this?
Yes, well, God expects us to cooperate with him, and that shows our faith.
Right.
He was going to deliver those that had the faith to obey him. And Noah showed his faith for 120 years and obeyed God in doing what he did. But we're not told about the cages for the animals and the special rooms that all the birds and animals would be in, any more than we're told about the anchor stones. All the details are not given, just a general outline of what God wanted man to do.
And I would say that the same thing goes for us today. Why would we have to do our part in our relationship with God? Because God could do anything for us, and we will just have to, to sit and wait for the transfiguration. Is that correct? I mean, that's something Noah could have done, but that's not the case, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to move on to the second part of our webcast today. So the first part was about the anchor stones. There is much more information to find and much more data to cover in this book and some other books that you have written, Jonathan, as well as on the website arcdiscovery.com, which you have seen on our previous slides. There are many other information to find there. And no, you will not find this information in the mass media. You will not find this information on the main websites of history today. And that's for another reason for another webcast. We have covered this in some of our previous webcasts, in some of the first one. Well, let's move on to the second point, the second part of this webcast, which is about metals. Metals nowhere in the ground around the boat shape, but only inside the formation. This is your statement, Jonathan. This is what I believe, even if I haven't been there, but I'm relying on your studies, on your research, Ron Wyatt and other people that have been there. So weren't the metal readings at the site random, not regular? And before,
well, actually, one of the
yeah, sorry, Jonathan, before you go there, I want to put here on the screen something which is very interesting. Let me see if I can show it to our viewer. Yes. This is a website, as you can see here, Noah's Ark Scans.nz. That's from New Zealand. A very, very interesting, which one of our friends here at Light Channel just pointed me to this website today. And I don't know who have done this, but here anyone can go in and look at this information. These are, as you can see, results of the subsurface imaging project of Noah's Ark. And that's the old picture. That's from the 59 satellite picture, or was it from, I think it was a fighter jet, right? The Turkish captain that took this picture in 1959, right? And these are also some radar scans, which we're going to cover. That's just to show you figure 3. That's a radar print out from one of the ARC scans, and so on and so on. That's some picture about the specimen, the rivet specimen that was found there, tape showing the position of the metal readings, and so forth here. So I just want to point our viewers to this very interesting website covering the scannings coming from this side, And I do also have a video clip, which I'm going to show later. But that's a question which is very much in regards to the metal readings, okay? Because one thing is about the anchor stones, but in my view, Jonathan, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in my view, the metal readings and these scannings are kind of, these are the proof that this is Noah's Ark. And these are the main target for the critics. The scannings are not correct. The equipment which has been used was failing or fake. Ron White was faking or failing. He was not an expert, and so on and so on. So is that correct? It's about the readings.
Well,
so if the critics can take the readings down and claim that they're non-scientifical, then Noah's Ark is out, right?
Yes. Well, I can sum that all up in just a few comments. The Ron Wyatt was the first to get the metal detectors, but 3 types by different people afterwards. 3 types of metal detectors have been used. 3 types of radar, 4-dimensional and 3-dimensional radar scanning have been used. And where the metal detector picks up a pattern, the radar picks up walls and rooms. So everything matches. The metal detection, the molecular frequency generator, the other metal detectors, and the radar scans are all in total agreement, and they have been confirmed by officially recognized laboratories in different parts of the world.
Okay. And this is not just your statement.
That sums up the whole thing.
Right. Okay. This information is available online. You can buy this book from Jonathan, as I mentioned several times. But we're gonna put here on the screen some of these reports, some of these scannings. And I've already mentioned on the screen. Could you mention the 1994, the official Turkish Ministry of Culture? And then the 85 scanning they Fossilized. Jonathan, please go ahead.
Yes, well, several times scientists have visited the site, and a member of the Turkish Noah's Ark Commission, a man from Erzurum University, he's become a good friend of ours, Dr. Salih Barukdatan. He actually drilled 4 holes in the structure and into a chamber. And in 3 of 4 drills, limonite, that's from metal oxide, was identified. And metal detector tests show that there's a pattern of metal beneath the surface consistent with the shape of a ship. And the scans were done numerous times using three, as I mentioned, three different types of metal detector, all of which confirm the same results.
Yeah.
And there are iron nodules in about 5,400 places in a pattern, located in lines, lengthwise and crosswise, consistent with a shaped hull of a boat. And the pattern found by the metal detectors was recorded by laying yellow and pink tape along the lines above the ground. And the shape of the arc also shows that it's collided with a rock as it was coming down. It came down in the mud flow, the volcanic lava flow. We pushed it down the mountain and where it is today. And in the process, it hit a rock, just like a motor car hits a lamp post and gets curved around the lamp post, so that one side of the arc shape is not straight but curved where the rock is. Now, outside the boat shape, there's no metal structure. The metal detectors and the radar scans show nothing outside, but only inside the boat shape.
Right. Could you please do some more explanation about the 1985 John Baumgartner results?
Well, John Baumgartner, well, he actually, in May 1985, he walked down the top of the wall with the metal detector going beep, beep, every 2 or 3 steps. And with the trained eye of a scientist, he suddenly shouted, "Undecomposed iron." Now, David Fassold, the marine salvage expert we spoke of earlier, was there at the same time. He ran in with a video recorder, and there in the wall, surrounded by mud, was a perfectly rectangular beam end. And from it projected what appeared to be iron flakes, which had given the signals. And earlier he had held in his hand a piece of wrought iron. It was a stretched and hammered angle bracket with the grain clearly visible. And the angle bracket was tested by Los Alamos National Laboratory in the USA. And it showed 91.84% iron, Fe2O3.
Wow.
So here we've got the whole structure is composed of angle brackets and iron rivets and so on, holding something together. And that's been tested later, which we'll get into later, as petrified wood. So the whole structure is made of petrified wood turned to stone, and held together at all the corners and intersections with iron.
Okay. Well,
only on the inside of the boat shape. Nothing like that on the outside, just natural soil on the outside.
Okay. Well, the skeptics are making the statement that, well, metal detector, that's kind of divining rod. And is it true that White used a crank device to obtain the iron pattern over the boat-shaped object, and that a molecular frequency generator is nothing but a divining rod?
Well, when you consider skeptics talking like that, I wish they would look at the evidence, because they're just making it up from their armchairs in their university rooms or wherever they're speaking from. They're not going to the site, and they're not examining what we're talking about. They're just making up their stories. And the divining rod idea, well, you know, the United States Police use the same kind of metal detector to find things they're looking for. And I know the very same metal detector that was used at the ARC site, one of the 3 different kinds, was used by the police department to find a dead body in a river. Okay. So the police must be using a divining rod, but what they found was what they were looking for.
Well, the critics at Creation Science quote John Baumgartner as saying that he doesn't believe in the pattern of metal lines in the site because he doesn't believe in the technique David Fassold used, which he called a form of dowsing. This refers to the molecular frequency generator. They allege that the structural lines marking the yellow tapes on the video suggests a boat was detected by, sorry for the misspelling here. I don't remember the word, different methods which border on the occult. Could you comment on this as well?
Well, actually, if we throw away the first one, the one that they call was was from the occult, like a divining rod. Throw away that one. You don't even need it. Use the other ones. They give the same result.
Yeah.
And that's the only argument you need is to tell them they're wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's enough information here. Metal detector, divining rod. It is noteworthy that the ex nihilo article condemning these gives no names of the scientists who supposedly built and tested these devices. And you also wrote in your book about Joe Walker, Nashville, Tennessee, used the molecular frequency generator to help the police department locate a body. So this molecular frequency generator that was used and manufactured by Cochrane and Associates of Bowling Green cost $6,500 US, quite a high price for a divining rod. Isn't that so?
Yes, absolutely. And David Fassold was happy to use these things too, because he's found shipwrecks off the coast of America by using it. So it's scientific, and it's in harmony with the results found by other kinds of metal detectors and also radar.
Okay.
So if you want to throw away that particular, what you want to call a divining rod, what are you going to do with all the other evidence?
Right. In
Which gives the same result.
Okay. Ray Brubaker in 1998 of God's News Behind the News in St. Petersburg, Florida, asked an electrical engineer to research Ron's claim. This independent, unbiased research on the part of Terry Johnson of Tampa included research on especially this molecular frequency generator. And you are attaching a report of this study of this research on page 84 to 86. That's a copy of this report. And the statement goes, as you can read here on the screen, we have no problem with John Baumgartner stating his opinion. However, we want all of the facts told. What they don't tell you is that Ron found the metal lines in 1994 using conventional white metal detectors, and that John and Ron used conventional metal detectors to verify the reading of the molecular frequency generator. So again, Jonathan here, did Ron Wyatt try to do from at least his perspective, his knowledge, his resources, because this takes a lot of money and time. As I remember, you were telling us that he's been using hundreds of thousands of dollars on this research.
Oh, yes. In fact, Ron sold his farm, which he had, to continue the research.
Yeah.
Now, if Ron sold his farm to continue this research and poured it into the Noah's Ark project, what was he doing that for? It was because he had found enough evidence that he knew what he was putting his money into. He just didn't throw it away. And not only that, Dave Fassold, marine salvage expert, he came in with his equipment, and it agreed with what Ron was finding. And others have done the same.
Yeah. Did Ron Wyatt at any point find any treasure at Noah's Ark?
No treasure.
No treasure. So he never recovered his investment in searching for Noah's Ark or proving that this is Noah's Ark.
No, in fact, when Ron died, his family had no money left to bury him, but there were kind people who donated it. Ron gave everything because he knew that this was going to glorify God, and he didn't do it to get rich. I had a skeptic phone me And his last words to me were, Ron Wyatt did it to get rich. Well, I didn't answer him because I was going to invite him to my house. That man has since died. I was going to go and get him over the table across in my room, in my dining room, and say, Colin, this is the evidence, let me show it to you.
Right.
And I would show him that Ron did not get rich and didn't want to get rich. He wanted to give everything for God's glory.
And that should tell us something about the motives behind Ron Wyatt. And I would say, even if you're live here with me, Jonathan, that should say about your motives as well. Because as far as I know, and I've been asking around people that have been with you, you're not a rich person. At least in the eyes of the world, in money. You're rich in something else, which is much bigger and much more important.
That's right. In fact, my wife and I are in agreement on this. We have devoted everything that we've got to God's name. And if he wants, and in fact, we've just sold a house and we're renting now because we want to, in the time that remains, we want to pour that extra money into God's work.
And I believe God is blessing your ministry, Jonathan, and your work. I was listening to the conversation before we went live here on this webcast. And as our viewers can see, you haven't broken your nose, but you had a small accident. But God has blessed you over the years, and you had, even at your very high age, you're still a very strong, healthy person, right?
Well, I have lived by the axiom, give God the glory, live for him. My whole life is for him, not for myself. If he wants to take me, so be it. I love him. And I want everyone to love him. I want everyone to know how wonderful he is. And while I'm on that, just let me give a quick testimony. It's not on the subject, but it'll show you how wonderful God is. And it only happened this week in Australia. One of our friends runs a health retreat called Misty Mountain.
Yes.
Now, hundreds of bushfires, hundreds of forest fires are raging in Australia right now, and lots of houses have been burnt down. People have been burnt. And Misty Mountain is a Seventh Adventist independent health retreat in Australia. And we prayed for their safety.
Wow.
And just the other day, this week, just gone, the fire was raging. A big wall of fire came right through to destroy everything. And as soon as it hit the first house, a wind came from the opposite direction and pushed the wall away, and it went round both sides and spared the place. And that happened 2 or 3 days ago. That's fresh. That's God looking after his people. And he does make a promise, I will rebuke the devourer. In this case, it was a devouring fire.
Wow. And Misty Mountains is run by, do you remember the name of the person?
Yes. Yes. Barbara O'Neill and her husband Michael. She's been doing the work and he's been administrating.
Right. I wanted to mention this because as probably some of our viewers know, I know this is off topic tonight, Barbara O'Neill has been under a tremendous pressure from the Australian Health Department, and they've been trying to shut down this very special ministry. And I hope by this testimony that you've just presented to us, Jonathan, that people will start to see that something divine is around this ministry, as you just mentioned ago. And I will probably we will probably have an interview. We have a request for Barbara to get her here on Light Channel TV at a later point. And this is amazing. So thank you for mentioning this. We have a couple of questions to go for before we finish this tonight webcast. It's also about the metal detector being a divining rod. Are the readings based entirely on that molecular frequency generator? And you were mentioning in your book on page 81, you're mentioning that there has been, at least so far, you have been involved into this research, 3 types of metal detectors. So it's number 1, pulse induction, number 2, ferromagnetic, and number 3, molecular frequency generator. So before you go into the explanation, Jonathan, I just want to point out to our viewers, Ron Wyatt might have not been trained, or at least he didn't have any PhD or any university training in archaeology, but he was not an amateur. And he was doing his best, as you did, to get as much as possible expertise on this research. So at this point, we're talking about metal detection. And the technologies that was available at that point in time were these three technology: pulse induction, ferromagnetic, and molecular frequency, as you can see on the screen behind me. Could you please just do an explanation on these three technology, Jonathan, for our viewers?
Well, I'm not
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm not an expert on the pulse induction or ferromagnetic or molecular frequency generator, but experts who have been consulted all say that these are acceptable and generally used by experts all over the world, and that they should give the same results, and at the ARC site they have given the same results.
Okay.
And then David Fassol brought in his scanner, and he was an expert, and he got the same results. And then radar scans were brought in, and they got the same results. The same pattern, in the same spots, everything the same. Doesn't matter what they used. So you've got more than two witnesses there without the molecular frequency generator.
Okay, all right. Okay, so different technologies, Jonathan. In your book, which I have shown here to our viewers before, I'm going to show it again here. You are going through all these tests that has been done at least till the point that you have read in this book. So different technologies, different teams, right? Different research teams. We're not just talking about you and Ron Wyatt, right?
That's right.
Okay. So these reports are mentioned here.
We're talking about people with scientific credentials.
Okay. Okay. So it's not about Ron Wyatt. Let's leave Ron Wyatt out of the picture. We're pointing to people with scientific credential, which have done not one, not two, not three, but several studies. And as we mentioned in our previous webcast, there is a team from Australia waiting for another permit from the Turkish government to go onto the site, the same site we're talking about, and do new scannings, right, with the latest technology. I'm not sure how far they've got.
Yes, that's right. Actually, a Turkish archaeologist is being given the permit, and workers that support the Ark discovery will be in, and we hope to be there too.
Right. And I've been pointing to some of the latest scannings and research that has been done by this Turkish professor. Unfortunately, his research, and there is also a video on YouTube. It's only in Turkish so far. We are not the only ones here at Light Channel TV. We've been asking for a translation into English, which hopefully will come very soon. And that's from the Turkish a professor. I don't remember his name. I don't know if you remember his name.
Dr. Salih Baruktan.
Okay, right. Okay.
And by the way, in an Australian court case, the Skeptics Society used an atheist to say in court that Dr. Salih Baruktan did not believe this was Noah's Ark.
Mm-hmm.
And when he heard about that in Turkey, he made a statement publicly to the Australian judge that they had lied, because he had never said that. He does believe it's Noah's Ark, and he says, next week I'm going back again. Okay. Now, they lost the case. The skeptics and the atheists lost the case because they had lied to the court about this man's testimony.
Wow, well, that's
but fortunately, he heard about it and made the correction.
What was the court case about? Why? Okay, could you tell a little bit more about this?
Yes, the court case was about another member, an Australian member of the team, who they wanted to say was lying about the ark, that there's no Noah's Ark, because he was actually a Christian school teacher, and he went across to the ark site, and he came back and he started making public meetings about the ark, and they didn't like that, so they took him to court, and they knew that he didn't have much money, so he had to sell his house, and his wife almost had a nervous breakdown because the whole family was in chaos as her husband was taken to court, and they wanted to destroy his image, and with that destroy the fact of Noah's Ark. But Dr. Bariktatin over in Turkey heard what they were doing, and so he sent a message which the judge received, and the judge said that the skeptics lost their case.
Wow, that's quite interesting how far some people would go. Why wouldn't they accept that at least somebody else has another opinion? Okay, why go so far as taking somebody's almost whatever possession and take a person to court? For me, it sounds like there is some kind of evil spirit behind this.
Well, yes. You see, Jesus himself uses Noah as an example for the last days, for the end times. As he says, as it was in the days of Noah, and he talks about the flood. Okay. Now, the ark is evidence of that. And Satan hates this. And as we come to the final showdown, we have a supernatural battle going on between Satan and Jesus.
Right.
And therefore, the opposition against the discoveries is supernatural. Satan is trying to destroy the evidence and deny it. And because Jesus is using Noah's Ark as an example for the end times, for us to get ready.
That's right. Well, at the end of this webcast...
It's a supernatural hatred.
Yeah.
It's a supernatural hatred, even among some Christians, against the discovery for that reason.
Okay. Well, I have a short video clip here at the end of this webcast. There is this channel on YouTube, which you're going to see during the video clip. This guy has been doing a compilation of the existing data on the scannings at this site here. Let's watch this video for a few minutes.
In late 2014, the Turkish government granted permission to allow the site of this buried object to be scanned using the latest deep penetration resistivity ground imaging technique. This scanning technique, which originated from deep oil and mineral exploration, measures the resistance of material scanned beneath the earth at a maximum depth of 38 meters, producing high-definition images for interpretation. This scanning technique has become widely adopted by the field of archaeology, and we are now, in essence, able to electronically excavate this boat-shaped formation without disturbing it. In this image, the red line indicates the ground level, and above being the only portion that you could see prior to 2014. If you're of the opinion this is a natural formation, you would expect to see random shapes beneath the surface. If you believe this is an ancient ship, likewise, you would expect to see ship-like features continued below ground. You are now viewing the entire image the scans of John Larson produced in 2014. From the ground level, what previously had been visible was less than 20% of this formation. We now see the boat-like features from above continue into the depths of the hull, showing precisely the shapes and symmetry you would expect to see from an ancient ship. This is not a natural formation. When a resistivity scan shows high electrical resistance, you get the color red, often from an empty cavity. When we have low electrical resistance, a dark blue is produced, often from a mud-filled cavity where the material forming the cavity does not allow water to freely drain away. Therefore, both red and dark blue indicates cavities that could be rooms inside a ship. In this image, a perfectly straight line of these cavities runs from the front of the ship to the rear, and each cavity is appropriate in size to a room. Please note, the bottom edge of these rooms produces the same electrical resistance as the hull material. In other words, the hull appears to be composed of a similar or same material as would be the decking. A scan penetrating deeper into the vessel produced this next image. Again, we see a straight line of rooms indicated from red open cavities. Please note, these are not the same rooms from the previous image, as this scan is from a deeper penetration. Instead, these are different rooms running perfectly parallel to the rooms in the previous image. The bottom edge or decking material which supports these rooms runs across the entire width of the vessel. The same decking material does not extend beyond the hull shape. It is confined to only within the parameters of the ship. This is not a natural formation. The following illustration is redundant to what I just stated about the last scan, but it's worth it. It's an animation of how scanning from the side of the ship and at varying depths produces images of different unique rooms running parallel to one another, extending across the width and also the length of the deck. In its entirety, we are now able to see a boat shape with perfectly parallel lines with some perpendicular lines showing symmetrical and cohesive properties from 3 deck levels, all working in coordination and not extending beyond the parameters of the boat shape. You cannot find these anomalies in nature. This is not a natural formation. Natural formation. For 40 years, this is all we've heard from the challengers. Will the revelations of this new research cause writers to respectfully amend or remove the disparaging articles you read on so many notable websites, even some Christian publications? Shouldn't we question these same sources regarding their character assassination of Ron Wyatt?
And I want to stop exactly right there, because that's my last question to you. Shouldn't we question, and any of the skeptics out there, based on the latest research, based on the scanning data, whatever has been said about Ron Wyatt, but this is not about Ron Wyatt, as we've mentioned so many times, Jonathan. This is about the findings which will never be accepted by the skeptics, obviously, at least some of them. Can you still hear me, Jonathan?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. The issue is not about Ron Wyatt. The skeptics, once they've made their voice heard, are too embarrassed to turn around and tell the world, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." Most skeptics are not honest enough, unfortunately, for that. But the truth is what counts, and it's the truth that will set us free.
Right. Do you have any other comments?
It's those who love the truth who will enter into the holy city.
Yeah. In regards to the video clip we just saw, Jonathan, was there something new that you didn't know? Or did he just confirm with the latest technology that this is exactly what you've been saying for over 20 years now, 25 years?
Yes, it confirms it, and it's good to see it. Nothing can destroy the evidence that we know is there, but only confirm it.
So as we go along, it seems that new studies, new researches that are being done on the same site are actually building the amount of information and the amount of data which are building around the case of Ron Wyatt, because Ron Wyatt, as we know, has been one of the first, if not the first one, to really take the story from the Turkish military pilot and bring it up into the world stage as being a real Bible true story and being a really kind of a big case when it started out. And we are now, how many years since Ron Wyatt? He started this in late 70s, as I remember, correct?
That's right.
Right. Okay.
Well, 40 years ago.
So it's about 40 years ago. Different teams, different researchers have been doing, this is from 2014. We're waiting for data from the next team, which is going to go there in Turkey, which is going to work with the Turkish professor. As we mentioned last time, even the Turkish government now, after so many years, have finally officially named this site as the real site of Noah's Ark. And I believe this is not just from a touristic perspective, but probably also because the government has been convinced about this tremendous amount of data. Am I just speculating here, Jonathan? What is your view on?
No, absolutely true. If you drive along the main highway in Turkey, eastern Turkey, toward the border with Iran, and over on your right up on the mountain is the remains of Noah's Ark. On the road itself, officially, official Turkish road sign has an arrow pointing up, and it says Nuhan Gemisi, Noah's Ark, the big boat of Noah. That's on the official road signs along the highway.
And we have shown this picture a couple of times in our previous webcast. So one last comment, Jonathan, before we finish this webcast from your side in regards to what we've covered tonight, the anchors and also the metal detectors. How much proof do we need, or how much proof do the skeptics need to accept, repent? It's not because you're expecting anybody to repent toward you, but this is a big thing. It's not just, okay, so who cares that this is Noah's Ark? It's not just like that, right?
Well, the skeptics made a prophecy 25 years ago. They said, give it enough time and later visits to the site will prove that this is all a big hoax, that it's not true. Well, given enough time now, we are finding that the more evidence is coming to prove that it is true. Only proving it true, not proving it not true. Right. And the more visits to the site, the more evidence or more parallel evidence is found showing that the earlier evidence is true.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, for being part of this webcast and for taking time. This is our last webcast with you in 2019. Actually, our last webcast and program recording we're going to do here at Light Channel TV. My name is Michael Similier, was your host here tonight. And I hope to see you next year. Jonathan as well. I hope to see you, our viewers, next year. Please follow with our webcast. As always, we're trying to do our very best to point to truth. We have no political attachments, or we're not trying to be political correct, but we're trying to present the truth in love as we have been instructed. So thank you for watching, and see you next year. And have a happy new year, Jonathan, from us here at Light Channel TV, and see you next time. Thank you.
God bless you.